Hey folks, this is Matt Rainwater, and today we're going to do another talk and draw, right, for this video. And we're going to do something a little different. I'm going to respond to a comment from last week's episode. So, last episode, I was drawing Douglas and Mila, and guess what? That's what I'm doing again for this episode. And there's some Lenny McKinney, too. Not going to say why they are hanging out with each other. You all figure that out come season 5. But nevertheless, let's get started, right? I want to talk about... so I'm going to ink these panels while I talk about or respond to this comment. And so this is from John Durrett, and John asks or says, "Hey Matt, Orb Guy here. For context, y'all, Orb Guy." So in the Discord, there's a Mancers Union Discord, and I will make sure that there's a link to it in this video. We will share music, right, that we've been listening to, and so this person is in the Discord and had mentioned, I can't quite remember the full context of it at the moment, but we were just, talking about stuff we were listening to, and John had posted an Orb album. The Orb's like this, I guess like 90s sort of rave electronic music outfit. They're really good. John got me sort of on this tear where like that was all I was listening to for a couple of weeks, just going through Orb's discography. And so that's what that's in reference to. So let's get back to John's comment. "I would enjoy a live stream when you're up for it, which I will be eventually. But for now, we'll do this. We're going to do this as, pre-record it one by one sort of thing." So going back to John's comments. "Without giving away spoilers, if you could go into your thoughts on the mysticism, parallel worlds, multidimensional places, and beings. Is the tune a way for you to explore your own thoughts or extrapolate on the thoughts expressed by others?" So that's his first question. And then the second one, "From an artistic standpoint, I'm curious if there's a preference on how you fill in the characters moving from blue draft to finished. I see your work skipping over areas and coming back later. For me, I would have to complete the hat, then face, chest, arms, entire sections." So I guess I'll start with the second first, then we'll get into the mysticism stuff. I guess when I'm doing that last video and this video, I'm inking, and when I'm inking, I'm only thinking about contour because I think when I'm more like drawing the figure work, right, like the blue lines, as you were saying, John, I am thinking more in that sense, like you were saying, where it's like, okay, I need to draw the hat, then I need to move on to the face. I will say my overall process is definitely like, it's definitely like general to more specific to more specific to more specific. And one of these days, and this might be something I say for a live stream, where I'll try and draw a panel from beginning to end, right? Like where it's just blank, there's nothing there, and then I do the gesture drawing, and then I step it up a notch to like rough pencils, and then tighten the pencils up. But to get more specifically to your question in regards to how I'm thinking about it, yeah, when I'm doing like the penciling stage, like the rough pencils and the finished pencils, but specifically the rough pencils, right? It's like if I'm doing gestures, and I'll just do this as an example, I'm just like, I'm not thinking I'm just doing like that, right? I'm just filling in shapes, getting kind of an idea of what the figure's gonna look like, right? I'm not. It's literally just basic blueprints. I don't want to get lost in the sauce of anything. I don't want to tighten any of the pencils up immediately. I just want to fill in space and get the composition set up and make sure that all that's working out. But after that gesture stage, that's when I will start to really get into that. Like, okay, first I'm gonna draw, Mila's hat. Then I'm gonna draw Mila's head. Then I'm gonna draw. But at the same time, trying to think about it from a holistic standpoint, right? Where I'm looking at the whole figure, and that's actually for me. That's actually kind of difficult. Like that's something I still struggle with a lot as an artist is thinking about it holistically. I still sometimes get lost in the sauce after the gesture portion, where I will start, paying way too much attention in the rough pencils. Like I'll pay too much attention to the face or like some hands or something, and I'll find later on when I zoom out the proportions are off and I have to fix it or whatever, which isn't a big deal when you're drawing digitally, right? It's very easy to resize something because you can just, get your magnetic lasso tool or whatever and select and transform, right? And then you can just resize it. But I think about that a lot because if I ever do more, I don't know, if I do any art not digitally, that could be an issue. And I have noticed that for the rare occasions where I do draw analog, and by analog I mean pencil and paper, right? I do have a slightly harder time feeling comfortable drawing, whereas in the past I didn't really have that issue. I've gotten very used to drawing digitally. It's definitely I don't know if this is the correct word to use necessarily, but the best word I can use to describe is it's like a crutch for me, right? Like drawing digitally, it's so easy to just Control Z whenever I have a mistake. And I definitely remember when I was doing books, or even like the very first season of Trailer Park Warlock, there's not too much room for mistakes, right? If you're doing pen and ink, or I was doing brush and ink for that first season, and you just gotta go with it, right? And every once in a while, there might be a line or something that I can fix up with some whiteout or try and fix digitally. But it was not the easiest thing at the beginning. It was actually pretty. It was pretty difficult, and to like fix up stuff. So I just didn't, I just didn't make mistakes, or whatever mistakes that I did make, which were usually just like lines were not, lines got wobbly, stuff like that. You just have to go with it because you really can't go back and change that when it's analog. But as I got into season 2 is when I started drawing digitally, and that really changed a lot of stuff. I still had wonky line art in that season. I would say like the first, let's like say the first third of that season. Some of the line art was wonky, and then over time it really started to tighten up a lot. And then by season 3, I feel like my line art overall, although a lot of my figure work was a little bit off here and there, and I still have issues with that from time to time. By season 3, my line art had really tightened up a lot, and that was because I had finally started getting used to drawing digitally, and in particular, like this inking stage, like what I'm doing right now, where this is finalized lines. But to get, I think, more in depth with your question, what you see me doing and what I'm thinking about conceptually when I'm doing this, I'm thinking about the line weight more so than anything else. I'm thinking about how the contour of the characters appear. So like I'm right now, and you might see me do this where I will change the line weight dimensions on my brush tool. So like I'm going to change it and make it a little lighter for, actually I'm going to change it back to 30. For Douglas in the background, because I want his line art to be a little bit lighter than Mila's to give the suggestion that, or to reinforce the fact that Douglas is in the background, Mila's in the foreground. And it's a slight, subtle thing that gives some indication of dimension. It's not huge. You may not even notice it. But any little trick that you can use to heighten or reinforce dimension, it really does pay off over time. And I think that's all I have to say on that. That's why I stalled out. So, let's get on to your second, or actually your first. Your first question in regards to, let me reread it. If you go into your thoughts on the mysticism, parallel worlds, multidimensional places and beings, is the tune a way for you to explore your own thoughts or extrapolate on the thoughts expressed by others? So my answer to that is yes, or both and. It's definitely extrapolating on others' work, a lot of intellectual stuff that I thought a lot about especially during a particular period of my life. Especially during my transition between mid-20s to 30s. Questions that were going through my head in regards to just thinking about reality, thinking about subjective experience, and I'll try and find a better way to explain what I mean when I say that in just a moment. I guess another way of putting it, yeah, mystical experiences, right? I'm not like a professional mystic or anything, but I have had experiences that I would call ineffable or, outside of the realm of what I would call normal. And my reaction to those experiences have never been an immediate sort of, this must be true. It's been more like, okay, what does this mean? What's the reality behind this? Is there any reality behind this? And a writer that I really got into for a while, and somebody who is still, he's passed a long time ago, but a writer who I still respect greatly, Robert Anton Wilson. He wrote a lot of books in regards to this sort of subject. And most of his books sort of deal with human neurology and sort of the fascinating Venn diagram between science and mysticism and how we perceive our world, right? How we think about reality, what is reality even, that kind of stuff turns out is heavy in a lot of occult literature, and a lot of hermetic, Kemetic traditions, because these are all traditions that sort of stem from people, and some, even though they were older traditions, they were basically scientifically pursued, which is to say, these are people who were just doing trial and error, trying to figure out what happens if you do this, this set of chemicals, right? Or this set of sound baths and stuff like that, just weird stuff, right? They're trying out weird stuff to see what happens. I think that was kind of the nature of human inquiry, especially in older civilizations that we still do today, but it's been tampered a lot, or tempered, maybe is a better word. Not even necessarily tempered. I would say it's just not as upfront. I think there are modern day dogmas that, I'm getting really lost in the sauce. I'm sorry. This is getting too far. Let me get back to your original question. right? Let's get into. So, like I said, Robert Anton Wilson, right? I was kind of getting into a tangent about that. That's a whole other. That's a whole other subject. That was one guy who really inspired me in a lot of ways. He has a book called Illuminatus Trilogy, which is a fictional book, and it's one of the weirdest novels I've ever read. And one of the premises of the trilogy is, what if every single conspiracy theory were true? You know, what kind of madcap world would that look like? And a lot of my sarcastic humor, a lot of the sort of zany stuff that happens in Trailer Park Warlock is inspired in some amount to like stuff that happens in those Illuminatus trilogy books. It's those books are very dense. I'll put it that way, because on the one hand, it's a novel, right? It's kind of a fantasy science fiction novel. On the other hand, it's also kind of a professorial, not dictionary necessarily, like almost encyclopedia of all these different occult traditions and sort of mind-bending psychedelic thoughts and quips and queries. And it is a book that is extremely thoughtful and insightful and hilarious at the same time. And that was something that I just like I got from those books that I wanted to replicate in some way. And also sort of respond to also, because there are things like from Robert Anton Wilson's litany of work that I have responses towards. I have sort of things that I want to say in my own way, or as a critique, or as a, I don't know what the proper word is. The poetic term is barbaric yop, where it's just like you're saying something. You're saying something sort of like as a, well, yeah, check me out, which is, every artist kind of has that to a certain extent. So that's in regards to sort of other authors' work. And like I said, previously, in a commentary episode in regards to the character Lenny McKinney, right? He, like the character himself, I created him as a response to sort of thoughts that I had in regards to Terence McKenna, because that, like, I cannot understate this or overstate this. I don't I can state this. I probably listened to 100 hours of Terence McKenna lectures between the years of 2011 to 2016. Like, almost nonstop. Like, to the point that it was, it may have been, like, concerning, His voice sort of occupied my head for a little bit. And I think through that experience, I came to a point where I was like, okay, I'm gonna use this character, since he's kind of a voice in my head, and sort of exercise that voice artistically in a way where I'm both doing a loving caricature of the character of Terence McKenna, because the person of Terence McKenna and the character of Terence McKenna are kind of two different things when you really get down to it. I'm going to lovingly caricature him, and then also sort of, this will be sort of a point to be made in season 5. And also sort of make a critique about him. And I think, you see in the introductory episode of Lenny. I do have kind of a critique about him. About here's uh, this stoner who's just like going about doing whatever, and you don't know whether or not to take him for real or not. Which is kind of the case for the real life Terence McKenna. There are certain aspects, and I need to. There's a little bit more research I actually want to do. And just as an aside, there's a book that his brother Dennis wrote called Brotherhood of the Abyss that I really want to read, but it turns out that unless you get like a Kindle copy of it, it's about $300 a throw, just for like a paperback edition. Because it was a book that Dennis published as a Kickstarter project, so there's just not a lot of copies of it. Anyway, I do know, though, from hearing Dennis talk about this and kind of people, other people who were close to him in life, reading the book, sort of discover, like, there was a point where Terrence was talking about, like, experiences that he would have during the mushroom trips. This was later in life. And this was after, like, he would talk about, like, he had mushroom trips recently, and in reality, he had quit altogether because he had this really terrible experience where he just quit it entirely. Granted, like, this guy was doing, this guy was, visiting the the outer echelons of existence on a weekly basis for years. And so, in some sense, he could easily just riff off of past trips for the rest of his life, and it's not a big deal. But anyway, I look at that and I kind of go, oh, okay, there's an aspect to Terrence that's a little bit like, okay, he's sort of a wily trickster character, and he could be drawn to not say everything, right? To even lie to people he cared about and loved because he wanted to be seen as authentic when when in reality he's really skirting that in a lot of ways. And so anyway, that little fact, right? It created a slight hole in my view of the character of the person of Terence McKenna, this person who I'd sort of, I don't know, I saw as a saint, as a patron saint of the mushroom or whatever. I suddenly had this moment of, okay, well, he's not a perfect human being. Who is, really, ultimately? But that gave me inspiration to sort of work on this character of Lenny, right? So that's another place where I am responding to outside influences on this work. I think another writer that I'm responding to is Alan Moore. Both positive in critical ways, right? There's a book that Alan Moore had written. It took him like 10 years to write, and it took me about 3 years to read. It's a huge book. It's about 1,000 pages long. It's called Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is probably one of the... I mean, I say this, I've never read Finnegan's Wake, which is also supposed to be this way, but Jerusalem is I would say, the most mind-bending book I've read and ever, right? Like, it is a book that... It's a very personal work. So Alan Moore wrote this book that's strictly about his hometown where he's grown up in, where he's lived in, where he's probably going to die in, because he's really dedicated to the place of his birth. And it's a book that sort of fictionally outlines his family history, or mythologizes it, might be another way of putting it, and mythologizes the locale in Northampton over the course of 2,000 years. And this is a story that's told non-linearly. There are parts in the story where you go into basically ghost world, and he very mathematically tries to describe what life as a ghost looks like. and he sets up sort of an entire cosmology that is related to sort of modern science that he's into. Not modern science I'm into, but it works anyway. Um, a cosmology that sort of works around the idea of like, what if time, what if all of time was already determined, right? Like we live in a predetermined world, and everything that we say and do is already done, and we just relive that life over and over and over again. Um, with the only exceptions being, when we go outside of that dimension of time into the ghost world. Um, I highly recommend it as a book, but it's a very challenging book. There's a lot that goes on with it. It's somewhat. I finished reading it probably a year ago, and I'm still thinking about it. I still think about it pretty regularly. Um, it's a book that both made me love and hate Alan Moore. And I loved Alan Moore for a long, long time. I've always been, like Promethea was another book that he wrote that I was huge into and inspired me towards, occult mystical stuff. And anyway, like this story that I'm writing is like in a lot of ways a response to that and what I've thought about that, because I think to get more to the point, a lot of Trailer Park Warlock to me is both my own ponderings, but also sort of poking fun too at it. Poking fun at a lot of the mystical sort of tropes and ideas that that have been around for a while. Not necessarily like a negative criticism, but more like I don't know. Like I think it's good to laugh at things to sort of as a way to observe them from a different angle, right? To think about because one of the main ideas, right, in Trailer Park Warlock is like, okay, what if magic was real, and I mean, magic is kind of real in a way, in my opinion, but look, that's a whole other topic. What if magic is real and it's something that's it's so real that it's basic. Like you kind of everybody sees it almost like a trade where it's like plumbing, where it's like everybody knows plumbing is real, but hardly anybody knows how to do plumbing except for plumbers, right? It's that kind of idea. And I thought that that would be a great place to sort of explore feelings that I've had, and not just in regards to magic either. I know I talked about this in a previous in the season 4 wrap up. I talked about this, which was in a lot of ways I think about this as a metaphor for art, where art is something that I think is incredibly magical, but like people kind of treat it like a mundane thing, but the kind of mundane thing where they don't understand it, so they just don't bother. There are a lot of people who just look at people who make art or people who do artistic stuff as weirdos and outliers, and well, okay, but how can you entertain me, right? And it's important to be entertained. This isn't a criticism of that. This is more of more like talking about just an attitude, just a scenario I see played out in the world in some ways that it makes me sort of uncomfortable, and so in order to deal with it, I want to laugh at it. I want to poke fun at it. I want to sort of look at it from a weird perspective. All right. So let's go back. Okay, so I kind of talked about mysticism for a little bit. Parallel worlds and multidimensional places and beings. When have I feel like I haven't really done that much with. I guess we'll go the parallel world thing's tripping me up. I mean, I guess yeah. I guess if you go into sort of the Wheel of Abandon stuff in season 2, right? There is some parallel world stuff that goes on. There's some alternative timeline stuff, and in a lot of ways, I look at the story of Trailer Park Warlock as an alternative timeline, right? And I've been thinking about. I mean, we already kind of get it established. One of the main things that makes. I mean, it's just okay. I'm stammering a lot because I'm trying to figure out how to properly address it. Because what is an alternative timeline, right? I mean, technically, you could say a fantasy world is an alternative timeline where something happened in the past where suddenly, dragons exist on the planet. Like, Lord of the Rings could be technically an alternative timeline. I'm being very loose with this notion. And the reason why I say alternative timeline is because there's not a whole lot different with this world in our real world in the sense of the culture and sense of the attitudes and whatever, which was something for me that was something I thought was very important in writing this story because I really wanted to reflect my experiences growing up in the 90s in terms of attitudes that people had and in terms of just sort of what I remember as a kid. There's a certain nostalgic aspect to it. But there's a certain nostalgic aspect to it. I'm trying to figure out where my next thought was going. Right. Alternative timelines. So where does the alteration occur, right? One of the big ones is actually why I created the characters of the Masons, right? One of the big ones is like, okay, United States is more of this huge, like the Masons aren't just like this weird secret society. They're like a fixture of daily life. They're the feds, and this is when I did this, when I created this idea, it was more, in a lot of ways, it's a joke about sort of how people think about the federal government. I don't personally necessarily think that, like, I don't think in in terms of this sort of conspiratorial mindset that there's like a Illuminati or reptilian or deep state Masonic influence. Well, there is Masonic influence in the federal government, but it's not in the way that I describe it in this comic. This is very much fantasy in that sense. Also, the Masons don't. Actual Masons don't worship Horus. It's more of a metaphor that I'm trying to make that will hopefully land in season 5. But the point is like, okay, here's the alternative timeline sort of thing or aspect of like, what if Masonry became less secret over time and became like this this household fact, right, in the United States, and add that in like all the occult magical stuff, which is, it's stuff borrowed from Crowleyanism and all that, to create this weird world that Trailer Park Warlock takes place in. Here's the other thing. I'm like really struggling trying to describe all this stuff because the way that I think about it, it's not like I have like a checklist that I'm going down. Like, okay, Crowleyanism, check. Masons, check. It's like I just kind of connect all these dots subconsciously and pursue it in the story. Because here's the thing with a lot of occult mystical stuff, the dots inevitably connect on some level or another because that's kind of the nature of that I was gonna say biz. The nature of the biz. It's not a business that I know of. It is in the story, but it's not in real life. I guess it depends on what conventions you go to. But in the nature of this story, all these elements sort of come about, and I'm very much. I actually tweeted about this a couple of weeks ago. I think a lot of people who read this sort of think that I have this huge plan, that came into making the story. The reality is, it's not huge. A lot of this stuff was not planned out. Like somebody was surprised to see in season 2 when we first get the introductory episode for Set. They were surprised to see, Set and Horus as hieroglyphs in Set's weird temple in the basement of Jake's client, right? And they were like, "Oh, this was planned all along." I'm like, "Well, I mean, I didn't do the planning. The world did the planning. Like real life world did the planning. Where in Egyptian mythology, like Horus and Set are not. They're not buds. They have a very horrifying relationship, to put it lightly. An explicit, X-rated sort of relationship where you go, oh my God, this is I'm very much making the tarot version, or tarot, I don't know, the tarot version of Horus and Set's relationship in this story is a lot softer, a lot softer. And of course, let's going back to alternative timelines, right? Here's an alternative timeline or an alternative parallel world or whatever. One where everything's designed by children, but like crazy, magical, super intelligent children. And the most important aspect of that is sort of the attitude, the childlike attitude towards things, where it's all about creation, it's all about seeing how things play out, not giving a crap about ethical quandaries, just trial and error, and ecstatic embracement of life, which on one hand, right, is incredibly cool and interesting and fun, and then something that I wanted to sort of prank about or joke about or think about in regards to the story, also potentially horrifying in its outcomes. So anyway, that is, I don't know, I think that's the best way that I can address it in regards to your question, John. I was seeing if I had any other thoughts, any additional thoughts to add on to that. But I do believe I'm coming at the end of my ramble tank. I might be running out of ramble in a second. I will say, finally, kind of just going back to overall creative process stuff. Something that I think that I appreciate about doing this story, and something that I want to engage more with when I'm making stories, is to just be sort of locked into the flow of it. That's why I've a lot of these kind of videos will be while I'm inking, or when I'm coloring or flatting, in the future, because those are processes where I'm not thinking a whole lot. I'm just doing, and I'm doing what needs to be done, and it kind of comes automatic. And that's something that's really grown over the years. Like, there was a time where I had no clue how to make good line art. I just did not, I don't know, my hand was always really shaky. I always got nervous when I got to this sort of phase. And what happened is I got used to the idea of just like committing to making a stroke and not thinking about it. Just basically going, because that's how I am when I draw, right? Like I'm not thinking about it, I'm just doing it. And so what makes this stage kind of complicated or difficult is like at the beginning, what makes it complicated or difficult is getting into a mindset where it's like, oh, I love that line, right? I love the rough pencil line. Now I need to duplicate it for when I'm doing a finished pencil. And there was actually a time where I would actually just use rough pencils or finished pencils as the line art, and I would just color that. And it was okay. I don't know if anybody else would notice it, but I noticed the difference. I think that was season 3 or early season 4, one of those two situations. But the idea was like, okay, maybe I can just save myself time since I can just skip that phase. It ended up just being about the exact same amount of time because I would want to go in and I'd want to like really tighten up pencils. So at a certain point, I was like, well, you know what? I'll just be really loose with pencils, and I'm getting to the point where I can just ink even loose pencils. So anyway, I hope I've answered your questions, John. I hope I haven't added more questions, and if I have, feel free to respond, and we can just use that as fuel for the next video. And if anybody else out there has any other questions they want to ask in regards to Trailer Park Warlock, in regards to creative process stuff, like if you're working on your own story and you have some questions you want to ask for webtoon, comics making, painting, whatever, drawing, please shoot me a question in the comments of this video, and we will address it, or I will. I don't know who we are, but I will address it. And yeah, I hope you're all having a good one, and we will talk again soon. So that's right. I'm gonna finish these next 2 panels in a little bit, but I need to stop this recording. Like I was saying, y'all, thanks for hanging out, and we will talk again soon. Okay, bye.